ever get those old, random, embarrassing memories that suddenly come back at 2 a.m. and refuse to let you sleep? Well, recently I remembered my first trip to Spain. I was staying with this really nice girl, she welcomed me into her home, and the moment I stepped through the door, I immediately took off my shoes. Then I noticed her face change. I had absolutely no idea what was wrong, so I was just standing there, like slowly starting to panic. After a few awkward seconds, she took off her own shoes, ran to a wardrobe, and came back with a pair of slippers for each of us, saying,
"Maybe it's more comfortable this way."
Only later did I realize we had a cultural misunderstanding. I googled it and found maps like this one. Where I come from, wearing outdoor shoes inside someone's home is considered incredibly disrespectful. Taking your shoes off is something you do automatically, so imagine my surprise when I learned that in Spain it can be the complete opposite. But why is that? Let me know in the comments because this completely blew my mind. Looking back, I honestly wish I had known this before. I never meant to be rude. But maybe these little cultural differences are what make life so interesting, and that memory also reminded me that I could share my favorite slipper pattern with you. So let's turn some fabric into some cozy slippers. You can print the pattern on A4 or US letter and tape the pages together, or have it printed on a single A0 sheet. The pattern includes layers, so you can select and print only size you need. Before printing, don't forget to check your printer settings. Make sure the paper size is correct and the scale is set to actual size or 100%. Trim the pages along the cutting guidelines and assemble the pattern like a puzzle using tape or a glue stick. Once that's done, find your size using the size chart. At this point, you can either cut your size directly from the paper pattern or trace it onto transparent pattern film to keep the original pattern intact for future projects. This is a perfect project for using up your fabric scraps. If your fabric still has the selvage edge, simply align the grain line on the pattern with the selvage. But if you're working with a scrap piece and you're not sure which way the grain line runs, here's a simple trick. Gently pull the fabric in both directions. One direction will feel slightly stretchier, while the other will feel firmer and more stable. The firmer direction is the grain line. Once you find it, align the pattern piece with the grain line and you're ready to cut. For the slipper padding, I'm using this beautiful cotton wool batting, but you can use whatever padding materials you like. Once all the pieces are prepared, we can start sewing. I like to start by attaching the cotton wool padding to the outsole. To make the cotton wool easier to work with, I lightly press it first. When I pin it to the center of the outsole to keep everything in place. Next, I sew parallel vertical lines across the padding. I'm spacing my lines about 1.5 cm apart, but you can adjust the spacing to your preference. This step secures the padding in place and helps prevent it from shifting during use or washing. Next, I like to sew the upper slipper pieces together in pairs. Place the matching upper pieces right sides together and stitch them using a 1 cm seam allowance. Once sewn, press the seams open for a nice, clean finish. Next, we'll join the upper pieces at the center back heel seam. Place the pieces right sides together, match the edges, and sew the seam using a 1 cm seam allowance. Once sewn, press the seam open for a smooth, neat finish. Once you've pressed the seams open, top stitch on both sides of the seam. I like to use the edge of my sewing machine presser foot as a guide to keep the top stitching nice and even. Press the top stitch seam, making sure the heel seams are aligned. Next, we'll create the tunnel for the heel elastic. Use the notches marked on the upper piece pattern to determine the length of the tunnel. If your notches disappear during sewing, like mine did, simply transfer them back onto the fabric. Then, sew a line of stitching 1 cm from the edge to create the elastic tunnel. For this project, you'll need 0.5 cm wide elastic. Cut 2 pieces, each about 10 cm long. You can adjust the length if you'd like the slippers to fit more snugly or more loosely around your heel. Insert the elastic into the tunnels using an elastic threader or a safety pin. Pin both ends of the elastic in place to prevent it from slipping back into the tunnel. Then top stitch at the notch markings, sewing across the tunnel to secure the elastic ends into place. Now, lay the pair of the upper slipper pieces flat on your table. Match the toe center notches and secure them with a pin. This will create two asymmetrical upper pieces, one for the left slipper and one for the right. When baste around the outer edge using a seam allowance of less than 1 cm to hold all the fabric layers together before the final assembly. Next, place the outsole with the padding on top of the upper slipper piece with right sides facing together. Match the heel seam and the center toe notches, when use as many pins as needed to keep everything evenly aligned. Then sew around the edge using a 1 cm seam allowance. Now it's time to finish your slippers, and you have two options. You can either hide all the seam allowances for a clean finish or leave the final insole seam visible inside the slipper. The visible seam method is quicker and easier. Simply place the insole on top of the outsole with the wrong sides facing together, sew around the edge, then finish the seam with an overlock or zigzag stitch, and your slippers are ready to wear. But if you like cleaner, more professional finish with all the seams hidden, the second method is definitely worth the extra few minutes. Place the insole on top of the slipper with right sides facing together and pin it in place. Mark the edges of the opening you'll leave for turning the slipper right side out, when sew around the edge following the previous stitching line. Before turning the slipper right side out, I recommend folding the seam allowance of the turning opening inward by 1 cm and pressing it into place. This little step makes closing the opening much easier later and gives the finished seam a much cleaner, more professional look. And now for the final sewing step. Turn the slippers right side out through the opening, then close the turning opening either by hand using a ladder stitch for an invisible finish or simply top stitch it closed with your sewing machine. That's it for today. I hope this project inspired you to use your fabric scraps or maybe even create some thoughtful gifts for your loved ones. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.